We are live here on Instagram. We're live over here on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you all for joining. Today we're going to do a self-editing Q&A. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've had a lot of questions about self-editing, trying to figure out what we're talking about. And I apologize, Instagram, the angle's a little odd, but my tripod broke right before we started. So we're just making it work today. Okay. So today, again, we're talking about self-editing, everything self-editing, and this is just a Q&A session. Hi, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. We're going to get to as many as we can today. I've got some other ones that have been left for me. And let me put these in to make sure everyone can hear me. Okay, great. So today, again, we are going to talk about self-editing, answer all your questions. So please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be tracking that. But right now, we are going to go through some questions I had before. When I posted on Instagram, asked some questions. These are the questions that came in. So we're going to chat about those. All right, so the first one, a few of the questions I had were around mindset. There was a comment, excruciating, was used to describe editing. Stressful. Yes, I know. Somebody mentioned having the courage to go through the book over and over and over, a million times. Okay, so that's another mindset thing. How to deal with second guessing yourself, imposter syndrome, how to deal with self-doubt, inexperience, all of this. And then, yeah, so we're going to start talking about that for sure. I've got some notes here. I wanted to make sure I covered them. So the most important thing to remember when you're self-editing is you got to get your mindset right. And that's the case with no matter what you are doing, no matter what part of writing, your mindset has to be on. Now, you can put things in place that will actually fight past that and fight through the mindset piece of it, but you're never going to be as successful as you want to be, and it won't come as easy as you would like it to if you don't first get your mindset right. So the 3 M's of mindset, this is just kind of how, I don't know where I heard this, but the 3 M's of mindset are meditation, mantras, and movement. Forward movement, also called inspired action. So these are the 3 tenets that I use to help get my mindset in the right place so that we can make sure that things are going to be all set. Okay, so first one, meditation. You need meditation to sit, to be quiet, to let your brain calm down and get through all of that craziness in your brain and actually tap into your intuition. Tap into those things, the place where you write from, your truest self. So you need that meditation to quiet your mind. The second piece is the mantras. The mantras are what help you rewrite your limiting beliefs that you have about the writing process. Now, it is its own process to discover what those limiting beliefs are. So you will need to do that work. You need to lean in to the things that okay, let's just walk through a quick example. And I'm not a mindset coach necessarily, but so a quick example of trying to identify what you're doing. So you'd want to edit. You want to edit your book. That's what we're talking about today. And you sit down and, well, maybe you don't even sit down. You're like, I need to edit my book. I need to edit my book. And you just beat yourself up for it because you don't ever seem to actually sit down and do it. The issue with this, there could be several things going on, but you just have to keep asking yourself why. So why don't I want to sit down and edit? Well, I'm lazy. Nope, I don't believe that. That's not why. Keep digging. Why don't I want to sit down and edit? Well, maybe I don't think it's going to be good enough. That might be a key to a limiting belief. What about, well, maybe I don't think I can do it. That's another limiting belief. What if one of your limiting beliefs is you don't think your book is very good? Now, these may sound bad. They may sound depressing. They may not be your limiting beliefs. So you may be like, that's crazy. I wrote this book. Of course it's awesome. Why would anyone think that their book's not great? But there are a lot of things that go into our lifetime, and it's way bigger than just one live that I'm doing here on Instagram. So anyway, do the work. ask the questions, dig deep inside of where all of these beliefs are coming from. So it's not just a matter of pushing through and saying, I'm going to create a schedule and I'm going to self-edit. Yes, but it's going to feel like pulling teeth. If you get your mindset right, if you work through those limiting beliefs that are holding you back from actually sitting down to write or want to self-edit, then you are going to have a much easier time to do it. And bonus, it's going to actually be fun. And maybe not every single minute of the day, but it will actually go a lot more smoothly if you first work on your mindset. Then the third step is movement, forward movement. So whatever you do, you can work on your mindset, you can meditate, work on your mind, the mantras to get your mindset right, and rewrite those limiting beliefs, which are rewritten through mantras that you say frequently to help you rewire those stories in your brain. So that's where the mantras come in. You say them over and over. They're mantras that, I guess I didn't cover that. The mantras, once you identified your limiting belief, you write a mantra that is, it's hard to explain. This is like a very big concept, but hi, thank you for joining. So mantras are, okay, let me just give an example. So if you have identified that your limiting belief is that your book is not going to be very good, then your mantra could be, and of course this is guided by your intuition and what you feel is true for you, your mantra could be, my book is amazing. So simple. It doesn't even have to feel true to you at the moment, but it needs to be a truth that you want to embody, that you want to believe for yourself. And eventually, as you repeat those mantras, as you meditate to get your mind quiet and let all of the junk in your brain leave, because that's the point, then you'll start to believe those things that you've been saying to yourself. You almost start to memorize them, or they just start to internalize, and it's not overnight. So just be aware of that. But as you work through those things, then you can take that third step, forward movement, which you actually sit down and self-edit. When you do the mindset work first, those are those steps. Pay attention to those, find your limiting beliefs, do the mantras to rewrite them, and then you actually take that action. You will get your book self-edited. Okay, so how do we deal with not actually wanting to sit down and self-edit? Mindset, we talked about that. But there are a few things to remember. One, it does not have to be perfect. So let me just cover that. Y'all, not have to be perfect. Especially in the first couple of drafts. Like, it's not going to be perfect. That's literally the point of editing. And here, let me just free you from this mindset right here. When you're done editing and you've got all the drafts done, that we'll talk about the different drafts in a minute. When you are done self-editing, it still doesn't have to be perfect. Promise, it's not going to be perfect. But New York Times best-selling books still have typos. Now, there may be some that you can come up with that don't have typos, but I've seen them in books that are widely published, traditionally published books. There can be typos. There could be ways that you could have said something better. You could have brought in show versus tell a little bit better. You could have whatever. Fill in the blank. There's always chance for improvement. So it's never going to be perfect. You don't want it to be perfect, because then people are just, it creates a barrier between the reader and the author when things are so perfect. And this works for anything. This works for marketing. This works for a post. You want to be vulnerable, and showing imperfections is vulnerability. Now, that's not saying that you should just write your first draft and publish and hope for the best because you're being vulnerable. No, in that case, I don't want to be mean about this, but in that case, you're just taking the easy route. So we don't want to do that. We want to self-edit so that our books are excellent and we have put forth our best product, but do not get caught up in the perfectionism. Okay, that's the first thing. Imposter syndrome. Let's talk about this. Everyone started where you're starting. Whether you have 5 books out, 10 books out, 0 books out, whether you have just started writing your first few words and you've only got a paragraph on the page, everyone started where you are. Everyone has been where you are. And if they haven't been there, they will be soon. So do not worry about comparing yourself to someone else. Comparison is a huge problem, especially for authors, especially because we're in the digital age. We are on social media. We see all these authors. We think they're making thousands of dollars selling all these amazing books and writing all these amazing books. And we think that their life is amazing because we see the highlight reel on social media. Not always the case. We'll just put that out there. It's not always the case. So don't sell yourself short. Your process is your process. Everyone has to learn. Everyone goes through a process. It may be something that, you don't like. There may be things you need to learn and it takes longer than you would like it to, but embrace your process. Learn to love the journey. Learn to learn along the journey. Okay. Next one is change your beliefs about who you are. Now, we talked about this a little bit, and I'm just really not liking this angle here on this. It's like such a weird angle. Okay. I'm hoping that like doesn't freak out because anyway, okay. Yeah. If you did not tune in at first, my tripod broke like right before we went live. So I'm like having this weird little setup here. So just fix that a little bit. Okay. Let's get back on track. All right. So change your beliefs about who you are as a person. So this is going back to the mantras. This is limiting beliefs we have about ourselves and our identity. So our identity should be, I am a writer. And that's a great mantra to have. I am a writer. If that's something that you struggle with, if you struggle seeing yourself as someone who writes books, as someone who publishes books, whatever it is, I'm a writer. I am an author. I am someone who publishes books. Because once you embrace that identity and claim that for yourself, you are going to start acting like that. We can only act out of the identities that we believe about ourselves. So if we believe, and this is one I'm preaching to myself here, if we believe that we are a writer, we will write. Now, there are a lot of things that go into that, and it's not just, I believe I'm a writer, and then suddenly your life is suddenly rainbows and puppy dogs, and your kids go to bed and don't bug you, and your husband does not need anything from you, and you don't have any dishes to do, and food magically appears. No, it's not like that. Okay. There's still going to be things that happen in your life, and you're still going to have to make time to write, but it becomes so much easier. It comes from a place of ease and abundance instead of lack and scarcity. So believe you're a writer. Then, and someone asked this question, how do I find the courage to read through the book for the millionth time? Yes, I get it. But this is where that courage comes from, believing that you're a writer, believing that you can actually get through your editing and move on to the next step. It is not a hard thing, but the mindset will hold you back so much. And a lot of times, and this is, I know this because my last book, The Prophecy of the Codex, took me way too long to edit because my mindset was not right. It felt like drudgery. It felt like, and I loved the story. I loved the book. I loved the characters. It was so exciting, but it just felt like such a heavy task to sit down and edit this book that I had been working on for a while. And I had so many moving pieces, it just felt so overwhelming. So it's identifying what those things are that are holding you back from self-editing. Okay, so for the first almost 15 minutes, we talked about mindset. And I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more, but let's get into some of the nitty-gritty, some of the questions that I was asked specifically about the self-editing process, and we'll talk through some of that. Okay, so the first one was from Eve Casey, how to notice repeating words or phrases. Okay, so this is a big one. And this is, every author has their favorite words. I am included. Now, so I think professionally in the editing space, because I do book editing, I do book editing. Anyway, in the professional space, I think this is called echoes, like words that you use a lot and things that can, if you use words too often, it can pull the reader out of the story and then they're just not interested. So when you identify those echoes, when you identify those things, use a thesaurus. That's what synonyms are for, or rewrite the sentence. That could be a possibility as well. But how do you identify them in the first place? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Thank you, Eve. I appreciate that. Okay, so one of the ways that I identify, and it's very difficult to see your own repeating words, but one of the ways I do this is a quick reading. So there's not really a good way to describe this necessarily, but it's pretty much proofreading. You're reading it as if you're reading a book, and you read it quickly. So when you read, so you're writing your book, you know, you're typing out your as you're writing, you're just writing along, you know, figure out what's going on. And then you read it back and you're like, man, they are just like frowning a whole lot. Or, you know, you use a lot of the same facial expressions or the same words or whatever. And those are hard to see when you're writing. So in the self-editing process, you definitely should be looking for that. But the quicker you read it, you'll actually start to see those words that, like, maybe you used that same word a page ago or 2 pages ago. Or like for me, I switch scenes a lot because I switch POVs like crazy. Point of view. I switch the point of view a lot, and I do a section break for each of those. So each time I do a section break, sometimes those I wrote them on a different day. So or sometimes I do them out of order too. So when you come back and you're like reading through and you put things out of order, and then you get down to it and you're like, that same thing just happened in this scene that happened to be back to back, and it's like on the same page or this page before. So as you're quick reading through your document, this largely, I find these in the proofreading process, you'll start to identify and pick up those things that you don't necessarily want to be using all the time. So I hope that's helpful. Now, when you identify what those repeating words and phrases are, what those echoes are, it is great to use the find function. So if you are not familiar with the find function in your word processing software, whether it's Microsoft Word, Google Docs, Apple's Pages, I'm not familiar with Scrivener, but probably, I'm sure, because they've got all the bells and whistles. Use your find function and search for that word. You will quickly come up to see, hey, I've got, I don't know, 854 versions of the word frown. Yeah, that's probably a lot, depending on the size of your book. So you'll start to get a feel for what is going to feel differently. And as you click through those finds, like, I encourage you to do this with like a character name or just any words in your document. Like for me, I've got certain things like Codex. That's the name of the series. And so I use that in the book. So it's interesting to see how many times I actually use that in the manuscript itself. So you can search for the word, find it, and click through and find all the instances of it. And sometimes that will help you identify. Like, I tend to use people's name because I write in the third person. So I tend to use a person's name maybe a little too much. So I'm looking and I like search through and I'm like, wow, there's their name, next sentence their name, next paragraph 3 times. I'm like, that might be a little much. I need to use some pronouns here. But so you get the point. Use that find function and it'll give you usually a count of how many words you have of that instance, and then just click through them. See if you can rewrite some of them. See if you can rework the sentence or use a synonym. And the last thing I want to say about this is that get other eyes on your manuscript. That's really the best way to identify repeating words and phrases. And by the way, you can use the find function for phrases as well. But you don't always see what goes into your own document. You can't always see the things that you put in there because as writers, we're going to have a little bit of blinders on. So if you can get other eyes in your document, even an author friend that'll read it for you, that can identify, hey, it seems like you're using this word a lot. And then at least you know where to start looking and you know where to focus your attention. So, okay. So I hope that answered that question. I hope that is helpful. Hope that was good. Okay, so next one, where should you start editing from? And maybe a checklist of all the things that need to be done or looked at in order of priority. Now that is a massive topic. So let's start with the first part. And we're kind of going to give an overview here because we're just not going to keep you guys too long. Okay, so where do you start editing from? I have identified 6 different drafts. Now these can be combined, so don't be scared. And they actually can be expanded too. So you may not actually have 6 drafts. my biggest thing with the self-editing process is that it's going to be unique to you and it's going to be unique to your books. So if there could be a book that you wrote in a different way, maybe you tried outlining and it seemed to work for you really well when before you had been pantsing your book, or maybe you wrote the book chronologically and then the next one, it just didn't flow that way for you. Maybe you skipped around, and that's, by the way, how I did between the first and my second book. So things are going to change, things are going to evolve. And as you learn what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and you accommodate both of those and lean into the strengths and learn to work with your weaknesses, you will hopefully hone your self-editing process. But I've identified 6 general drafts that go into the writing of your book and the editing of your book. So by the end of the time and you've gone through all the different drafts, sorry, my legs are like killing me today. Okay, stretching out. Oh, I feel better. All right. So once you identify those different drafts, you can go through and just step by step walk through them. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. So we're going to talk through the different drafts, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you can find more information about that. Okay, so first draft. Now, I might get some hate for this, but I don't care because this is how I do it. And if it works for another author, then roll with it. So I call the first editing draft the clean first draft. And yeah, I know. It's a first draft. Yes. Your first draft, write it the way you need to write it. If you need to get it on the page, not look at it again until you're fully into the editing process, until it's absolutely done. The first draft, you type the end and then you go back and look at it, do it that way. By all means, skip this draft. But if you are the person that needs to go back and just do a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of cleaning up as you're writing, I don't have a problem with it. This is how I work. This is my process. So this is how I do it. There's some caveats. Clean first draft. I will write a scene or two or however much writing I did that day. Usually I finish writing and I shut it down for the day. The next day, before I start and continue on my writing journey, I go back and reread what I wrote. First of all, this helps because I'm a pantser and I know where I'm at in the story. I can get my head back in that frame of mind. Second of all, if there are words that are missing or things didn't quite get communicated the way I wanted them to get communicated, I can tweak those when the ideas are still fresh in my mind. I can add the words that I missed. I can, sometimes I'll catch that I use the wrong spelling of a word, which usually I don't, but as I'm writing, I just let it go and, just whatever. And so I can catch that. Or sometimes you just say, hey, this needs to show and not tell. You're telling here, leave yourself a note. You don't even have to spend a lot of time with this. Don't do extensive rewrites here, but going through and tweaking a few little things can help you get back into the pace of your story. It can help you catch the things that you might not catch a month from now when you're actually going through the edits. So if it works for you to do a clean first draft, do it. It's okay. I'm not going to hate on you. But if it's slowing you down, if you're not writing books as fast as you want because you're getting hung up on the editing, by all means, don't do it. You got to make it work for you. Okay, so that's the first draft. Second draft is developmental edits. Now, this is where I said it could expand, and this can expand drastically. So there are different ideas for for the developmental edits process. You can actually do a full draft or a full edit on your manuscript for timeline. That's a big one. That's one that I actually do. And you can combine some of these together. You can do all your developmental edits in one thing, or if it makes more sense for you to go through your document and say, okay, I'm just looking for timeline. That's it. I'm only looking at my timeline. I actually have a book and, oh, you can see it right here. And yeah, you can see it on both. That's my writing book. And I pull that out. And when I'm going through the editing process, I will write this page or whatever it is. I'll put the time and the day, either the date or the day of the week or whatever it is, something to give me a reference, and a short description of the scene. And then when I get to a different time, I'll put that down, same thing. So I've got like page three or four pages, depending on how long it takes, of the different timeline in my story. This helps because you can identify what time of day it is. You know if it's day or night, because sometimes as you're writing, you think it should be nighttime in your head, but then it's like noon. It's not going to be dark out. So things like that. You can look for plot holes. Obviously, we want to look for plot holes in the developmental edit. Continuity, consistency, description, point of view, theme. There are all sorts of things to look at in the story structure. And that's what you're looking at in developmental edits. This is not line editing. This is not technical stuff. This is overall story arc, character arc. Those are even, character arc, story arc, things you can look at. Consider all of those things, plug those plot holes, get that stuff wrapped up really nicely so that you have a cohesive story. Don't worry about the details yet. Next step. This is one that I actually added in. I don't know if this is traditional writing suggestion or not, but oh, Andrea, thank you. Love the timeline idea. I'm in my developmental edit now and have struggled with this. Well, great. I'm so glad it helped. It's one thing that I could not keep track of my timeline, so I had to go back and write it out. And by the way, for everyone that's on here, I am answering questions live too. So I'm going through the questions I got previously to the live, but if you have any questions now, please feel free to leave them and we'll discuss them. We'll go over them. So we're going through the different drafts that we can do. So the third draft that I like to use, and I don't always need it, but in my first book, I really needed it. I call it the cut, all caps, because you have to sometimes kill your darlings. I think that's a Stephen King thing, kill your darlings. Yeah. So sometimes you have to cut the things that you love. You have to maybe even cut a character that you love. You can combine characters, but if there is something that's redundant, because I found in my first draft, because of course I was a new writer, I didn't know what I was doing in my first book. I just kind of wrote what came to me. And I found out there was a lot of things that are redundant. I'm like, you already mentioned this. Like, she shouldn't be struggling with this. She just already figured that out. So as you get better, you may not need to do these edits as much, but look for redundancies, things like pacing. You may want to make sure your characters are squared away. And then you also want to make sure that you are being succinct. You do not want to drag the reader along, bore them to tears, because they're going to stop reading. So look in the cut version, if you feel like your book needs this, if you're an overwriter or you feel like there just might be too much going on in your book, look at it, be honest with yourself, tap into your intuition. That was one of the things somebody asked about, knowing when to cut out scenes or characters that they've worked so hard on. Trust your intuition. You probably deep down somewhere inside know when something doesn't feel right, when it doesn't belong in the story. You have to learn to trust that voice and say, if you're questioning it, that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to go, but it's a good indicator that you should seriously consider it. Because if you're just leaving everything in there because, oh, I love this scene so much, it's so great. Example, I wrote this really adorable scene. This is in my current draft and I'm still drafting it. So I'm still in the first draft, but I wrote an adorable scene and I loved it. And I was like, oh, this is so, like, it was funny. The characters were like, it was just cracking me up reading about it, because it was kind of like an embarrassing thing to talk about, but it was funny. And it's like, pretty much as soon as I wrote it, I'm like, this doesn't fit the book. This doesn't, and the determining question is, if you should leave something in, is, does it move the plot forward? Now, there are plots and subplots and character arcs, and so it's not going to be just one plot, like, oh no, well, they're not going to, this doesn't help them, I don't know, find the codex. I guess that's what happened in my first book. This doesn't help them find the codex, so I shouldn't include it. No. But there are subplots. There are developing character emotions and feelings and struggles. So you have to consider if it's part of that overall goal. So if it doesn't move the plot forward, if it doesn't move the story forward, you got to get rid of it. And for me, I loved that part. And it was important. There was information in there that needed to be said, but I found a way to do it where I brought in another character that brought in those concepts without nailing, like beating the reader over the head with it, without talking too much about it. And I realized that I know what I'm talking about. You guys don't know what I'm talking about, but it was, Anyway, so, but identify things like that in your story. You can also combine scenes. You can take a scene that you maybe fleshed out and did this whole big long dialogue, and you say, well, that kind of slows down the story. Maybe I just need a quick, like, they decided to go to the beach and move on. I mean, like, sometimes that's what you need for pacing. So think about all of those things about cutting, because you want to cut your manuscript until it bleeds. I know, it's kind of sad. And there's going to be words that you love and phrases that you love and characters even that you love. Writing that could be your favorite writing that you've done, but you've got to kill the darlings. You've got to let it go, because ultimately you are there to tell the best story possible in the best way possible. So you really want to just trust your intuition, learn to listen to it, lean into that. And then bonus, if you have a scene that you really like, but you had to get rid of for the story, that's why they have director's cuts, people. That's the movie thing. But you can do deleted scenes. You can have, and always save everything you cut, by the way. Anyway, so you can always have a deleted scene that you sent out as part of a pre-order bonus, or something you put up on your website for people to sign up for your email list. I mean, a whole lot of different things. So don't worry if you have to cut a scene. You could use it later. Or it's just something that you get to keep close to your heart, that you know more about characters. Side note, if you're writing a series, make sure that, okay, this is really funny. I get this third book, I'm working on the third book of my series, and I'm finding I'm referencing a lot of stuff that happened in book 1 and book 2. Well, there was a version of book 1 where there was a whole scene that happened, and I was picturing it in my head, and I was like, wait, did that make the final cut? So make sure you have your books nearby. I would show you. I'm using it to prop up my phone right now, but I have my books nearby. You can see prophecy hiding kind of back here, but I pull those out and go through and read them because I'm like, what actually happened? Because that could have been a different draft I was thinking of. Okay, I'm going on too long. All right, draft 4. All right, I have a comment. Always be cutting. Yes, the ABCs of self-editing. Thank you, Eve, for that. I love that. Always be cutting. Kill your darlings. Yep. I love it. Okay. Draft 4, content editing. By the way, this is my self-editing checklist. I printed it out so that I could go over it with you guys. And this is part of the self-editing ebook bundle on my website. So if you want more information about this, the ebook talks you through, it's got like all the little points and stuff. You guys can see it over here too. It's got all the little checklists and things to look for and how to kind of walk through and develop your own self-editing process. But that's what these drafts are coming from. So I go more in depth about that in the ebook. As part of that bundle, I include this checklist, and there's also a story Bible template in there that you can pull up and customize fully to your book so that you can get everything right. You can use, I think I have a spreadsheet on there just for timeline and, other different things. Make sure your continuity is good and all of that. Be able to track your characters and character arcs and all of that. So it's super fun. And because I love spreadsheets, it's just because I'm a nerd that way. And I think there's even like a word count tracker where you can track how much progress you're making and things like that, which you can see. I'm like super excited about that. I'm just nerding out about it. Okay. Anyway, so draft 4 is content editing. This is where you kind of start getting into more of the details. This is also where you're going to address things like show versus tell. You're going to look for readability and clarity, unnecessary words. You're going to look for adverbs, those ly words, but they're not always ly words. Look for point of view. Again, you're going to address point of view, but more on a line-by-line basis here. This is why content editing is also sometimes called line editing. So you're looking kind of at a sentence level about all the different things, making sure it's reading well, making sure that it's just smooth. Now, one note about this. If this is not your thing, if you don't like this part or you don't think you are good at it, it's helpful for the author to do this themselves. But if it's something that you are really struggling with and you feel like you cannot do this, or it's not something you want to spend your time on, this is what a good content editor will do for you. This is what I do when I edit books. So if you want to pass and send your book off to an editor at this point, you are welcome to. But if you are doing it yourself, or if you want to make sure that it's the optimal, best product that you can make before you send it to your editor, look at content editing. You look for repeating words here, and you might identify those as you're kind of reading through quickly and things like that. And be cognizant of reader fatigue. Sentence and paragraph length should be varied. Do not ever have the same paragraph length over and over and over unless it's for a specific reason. It makes the reader tired. It makes them want to put your book away and go to sleep. So, little tip about pacing there. Okay. Now, the 5th draft is copy editing. Now, again, if this is not your strong suit, grammar's not your thing, you don't like to make sure that the punctuation's all correct, or you're just not familiar with it, send it off to an editor. Usually, now these last 3 drafts, because we talked there were 6, these last 3 drafts, this is what I do as I'm editing a book: the content edit, the copy edit, and then the proofread. But so if this is not your thing, send it on to an editor. If it is your thing, or you just want to make sure, again, that it's the best product that you can put out as an author before you send it to your editor, because the more eyes you have working on it, the more times you go through it, the better it'll be. You're going to look for things like typos and comma usage and punctuation, grammatical errors, spelling, and, things like unintentional fragments, things that sometimes you want to use a fragment, and that's fine. Like, a sentence that doesn't have a subject verb, taking you back to English class in like grade school or something. If you want to use a fragment, sometimes that's intentional, but sometimes it's not. So just looking for those types of things. And again, I go into this more fully into the ebook that I created, and that's up on my website. I think I linked to, in the YouTube and the Facebook video, I linked to the free self-editing author's guide to self-editing that kind of gives you the overview of self-editing, kind of what we're talking about today. But I can also link to, you can go on my website and find the self-editing ebook bundle, because it's, again, goes into this in way more detail. All right, and then the 6th draft is proofreading. Now, this is kind of where you might catch those repeating words if you haven't caught them already. This is where you are going to make sure that everything reads like a book that you actually want it to read like. So, proofreading. Basically, you're reading everything, every word. Now, the way that I suggest that you proofread is to read it out loud like a robot. That's like my thing. I don't know. So what that means is you read every single word out loud like a robot. So you're reading like, read your manuscript aloud using expanded words. That's what I have in here. You read it like a robot because your brain interprets that differently. And then you're going to hear things if you're missing a word or something. And then I always suggest that you read your contractions spread out. So if you have the word can't, you read it as cannot. Because there are times when like we're, like we are, or were, you might have used the wrong one and you don't know that unless you read the contraction like expanded. So every time, won't again is will not, did not, things like that. I read those, and as a consequence, now every time I read something out loud, I always do that. So split up your contractions. That helps you make sure that you're using the right version of that contraction. Again, if it has apostrophe, it's a contraction. Generally, I think that's probably a good rule. And if it's not, it should not be a contraction. Anyway, okay. So that's basically the 6 drafts that I've identified. Again, you can expand, especially the developmental editing part, to look for specifically timeline or specifically this character's arc or however you want to do it. So it may not just be 6 drafts. But I hope that was really helpful. I hope that made a lot of sense. And again, last little plug, check out the self-editing ebook bundle on my website for more information on that. Goes deeper into it. It's got the ebook. The ebook's not super long, but it goes into a lot more detail on these, gives you some checklists. And then hopefully that can help you through the self-editing process. All right. Now, again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to leave them. I'm just going to cover kind of a little bit of overview. I want to make sure I have everything here, and then we're going to wrap up. But let's see. Yeah, we talked about second guessing yourself. Goes back to mindset. Let me just say this about self-editing. It can feel very overwhelming. It can feel daunting and stressful, but it doesn't have to be. If you work on your mindset, and then if you create a plan for getting these things done, if you create deadlines for yourself, if you love spreadsheets like me or scheduling, planning, and you like to put that on your planner and you say, today I'm going to edit 250 words. Today I'm going to edit 3 pages. Today I'm going to get chapter 5 done. If you have a plan in place that works for you and for your manuscript, it's just going to be so much simpler for you, I promise. So that was kind of how I created the self-editing ebook. Like, I decided to write that and then create the bundle with it so that you would have the tools to go with it to actually edit your book, because I struggled so much with the Prophecy of the Codex and actually sitting down and getting it done. And I realized it was because I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a way to go through and say, okay, I really need to just sit down and schedule this time out. I got it. For me, the hang up was that I believed in the book. I loved the book. I loved the story. I loved the characters. I really wanted to get it out into the world, but I was being held back by the fact that I didn't have a plan. So if you're interested in that, this is not me pitching, this is not the intent of this live to pitch it, but if you want to know more, feel free to DM me. I can send you the link or whatever, but yeah, so, okay. So I hope that was really helpful. I hope you guys got a lot out of that and helped you think about self-editing, hopefully a little bit differently. Hopefully it doesn't seem so overwhelming and daunting now. And always feel free to, reach out if you have a question or comment on one of the posts. If I'd love to interact with you and help you through all the information that you need, because we are all in this together. Believe me, as soon as I get this first draft done of my 3rd book in the series, which is actually my 4th book, I'm going to go back and edit the 3rd book that I'm going to that's actually going to come out first. So I will be in the self-editing thick of it in about a month or so. So hopefully less. So I'm right there with you. This is something all authors have to do. And if you really want your book to be the best that it can be, you got to self-edit. You got to self-edit. Don't just write the first draft and send it to your editor, because they're not going to necessarily know what you were trying to say at 3 a.m. when you skipped 5 words because you were really tired. They may not be able to figure it out. So self-edit, 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 and it'll make your book the best it can be. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. I really appreciate you all showing up. I hope it was super helpful. Okay. Well, I will be back next Tuesday. We're still talking about editing, but I think we're going to start moving on past self-editing and into how to work with an editor and getting information about that. So I hope you tune in next week. All right. Bye, Facebook and YouTube. I'll talk to you